UN 10. The Bratva was born in Soviet prisons, not on the streets. While American gangs like the Mafia grew out of city neighborhoods, the Bratva's roots trace back to the gulags, the brutal Soviet labor camps where criminals, political prisoners, and soldiers were thrown together in the early 20th century. Inside those frozen hellholes, survival depended on loyalty and cruelty. Prisoners formed a caste known as the vori v zakone, literally thieves in law. These were not petty pickpockets but elite criminals who built a rigid hierarchy complete with laws, rituals, and punishments. They lived by one rule above all: absolute rejection of the state. A VOR couldn't work for the government, serve in the military, or cooperate with police. They were outside the system and proud of it. Their world had its own constitution. Tattoos were not just decoration, they were identification. A star on the shoulders meant authority. A cathedral on the chest counted the years in prison. Eyes on the chest warned that the man sees everything. Each symbol told a life story. Crimes committed, rank achieved, punishment survived. These tattoos were earned, not chosen. Wearing one you hadn't earned was a death sentence. By the time Stalin's gulags emptied after World War II, the Vori emerged as hardened warlords of the underworld. They carried their code beyond the prison walls, spreading across Soviet cities like Moscow, Leningrad, and Odessa. The Soviet government tried to destroy them, but in doing so, it only made them stronger. The Bratva's foundation was laid, not by ambition, but by necessity, forged in hunger, violence, and ice. Number 9. They became richer. After the Soviet Union collapsed. When the Soviet Union fell in the early 1990s, Russia descended into chaos. Factories closed overnight. The ruble became worthless. Millions of soldiers, scientists, and bureaucrats suddenly found themselves unemployed. Into that vacuum stepped the Bratva. Where the state had failed, the brotherhood saw opportunity. They seized control of everything the government abandoned: oil, gas, aluminum, shipping, and banking. Picture this: a country filled with desperate men trained in warfare, warehouses full of weapons, and no one guarding the vaults. The Bratva didn't just steal, they organized. They offered protection to businesses that didn't even ask for it. They took over ports, trucking routes, and construction projects. They didn't operate in the shadows anymore. They became the system. One of the most chilling examples is how Russian mobsters infiltrated the newly privatized industries. When Soviet assets were auctioned off, gangsters used intimidation or outright violence to take control. The rise of the oligarchs wasn't just about smart business. It was about who had the muscle to survive the lawless 90s. A banker who didn't play ball might find his car rigged with explosives. A journalist asking too many questions might disappear on a quiet night in Moscow. The Bratva didn't just adapt to capitalism, they hijacked it. They built corporations, laundered money through Western banks, and sent their enforcers to London, New York, and Tel Aviv. Their empire went global almost overnight. By the late 1990s, U.S. intelligence agencies estimated that Russian organized crime controlled as much as 1/3 of the Russian economy. But here's what made them different from other criminal organizations. They saw themselves as businessmen first, killers second. If the Italian Mafia was a family, the Bratva was a corporation, with board meetings conducted in smoke-filled nightclubs and disputes settled with AK-47s instead of lawyers. They played chess while everyone else was still learning checkers. And that corporate mindset made them nearly unstoppable. When the world opened its markets, the Bratva opened its claws. From the docks of Vladivostok to the skyscrapers of Manhattan, they turned post-Soviet chaos into cold, calculated profit. Number 8. Their code of honor was more sacred than the law. To outsiders, the Bratva might look like a loose collection of violent criminals, but inside, it functioned like a cult built on discipline, silence, and absolute loyalty. At the heart of it all was the Vori v Zakone code, a secret oath sworn in blood. Once a man became a Vor, he ceased to exist as an ordinary citizen. He couldn't marry, own property, or cooperate with any authority. His loyalty belonged entirely to the Brotherhood. In the Soviet world, this made him both an outlaw and a legend. Breaking that code meant death. And the Bratva didn't kill you quickly. They made examples. In one infamous case in the 1980s, a member who confessed to the police had his tongue cut out and nailed to the door of a police station as a warning. In another, a thief who stole from his comrades was buried alive under the prison floor. Their justice was medieval, but to the Vori it was necessary. The only way to maintain order among wolves was to prove that betrayal carried the highest price. Yet, paradoxically, their moral compass was twisted but clear. They had their own laws against harming women and children, and they saw themselves as protectors of the weak against corrupt governments. To the impoverished, the Bratva sometimes seemed like modern-day Robin Hoods, taking from the powerful and redistributing justice in their own brutal way. But that illusion often faded once people realized the Bratva ES protection came with a bill that never stopped growing. The code also governed their appearance and behavior. Even tattoos followed hierarchy. Stars on the shoulders were reserved for high-ranking members, while a cross on the chest meant, "I answer only to God and the Vori." The smallest mistake, a misused symbol or an unearned mark, could get you executed. These symbols were their uniform, their resume, and their death warrant all in one. To Western criminals, money was power. To the Bratva, honor was power. You could lose your fortune and still keep your life, but lose your honor and you were already dead. That SY FBI agents who spent years investigating Russian gangs often said the Bratva wasn't just an organization, it was an ideology. Number 7. They infiltrated governments and intelligence agencies. Perhaps the most terrifying fact about the Russian Bratva isn't their violence, it's their invisibility. They didn't just rule the streets, they began slipping into the halls of power. As the Soviet Union crumbled, a wave of ex-KGB officers, soldiers, and police officers found themselves unemployed, armed, and connected. Many of them turned to organized crime. The line between the Bratva and the state blurred until no one could tell where one ended and the other began. By the mid-1990s, Russian intelligence agencies were so compromised that Western analysts coined the term kleptocracy, rule by thieves. The Bratva had men in customs offices, airports, banks, and even embassies. They controlled import-export operations and laundered billions through offshore companies. In some cases, they were the ones enforcing Russian policy abroad, smuggling weapons to friendly regimes or silencing critics under the guise of business disputes. Take the example of Semyon Mogilevich, often described by the FBI as the most dangerous mobster in the world. Born in Ukraine, Mogilevich rose to control a sprawling network of arms smuggling, drug trafficking, and financial fraud stretching from Moscow to Budapest to New York. He operated legitimate businesses as fronts, including a chain of art galleries and an oil company. His connections ran so deep that when the FBI placed him on their 10 most wanted list, he was reportedly living openly in Moscow, under government protection. This is what made the Bratva unique. They weren't simply gangsters. They were a shadow state. They could bribe a border guard as easily as they could assassinate a rival. They didn't just evade law enforcement. They were law enforcement in many regions. The Bratva's reach extended into every layer of Russian life. Judges, mayors, and even generals had mob ties. It wasn't unusual for a police chief to attend the wedding of a known Vor. In the West, law enforcement was stunned by how effectively the Bratva used government machinery as a weapon. While American gangs ran from police, the Bratva used the police. It was a silent, systematic infiltration that turned crime into governance, and that's what truly made them dangerous. Not their guns, but their access. When organized crime merges with political power, There's no need for shootouts. The war is fought through contracts, laws, and influence. The Russian Bratva mastered that game long before the world even realized it was being played. The K6, the Bratva, went global, from Moscow to Miami. In the early 1990s, as Russia stumbled through its chaotic transition to capitalism, the Bratva didn't just consolidate power at home, they went international. What began as an underworld empire inside the crumbling Soviet bloc turned into one of the most sophisticated global crime networks the world had ever seen. They moved fast, exploiting weak borders, unstable economies, and Western greed. And the timing was perfect. The Cold War was over, the Iron Curtain was gone, and billions of dollars worth of untracked Soviet money was floating loose in the world. The first destination? The United States. Cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Miami became gateways for the new Russian mob. Brighton Beach in Brooklyn, nicknamed Little Odessa, turned into a command post. Immigrants poured in, some legitimate refugees, others enforcers or smugglers in disguise. The Bratva blended in with the diaspora, setting up shop in auto dealerships, nightclubs, and import-export firms that doubled as fronts for money laundering, arms dealing, and human trafficking. They didn't compete with the Italian Mafia, they collaborated. In the 1990s, FBI wiretaps caught Russian mobsters working alongside the Gambino and Genovese families in racketeering and drug smuggling operations. One Russian group was even supplying military-grade weapons to Colombian cartels in exchange for cocaine shipments. They were businessmen of the underworld, connecting crime syndicates that once operated in isolation. Europe, too, became their playground. In Spain, the Bratva invested heavily in real estate on the Costa del Sol, turning it into a sunny front for billions in dirty cash. In London, they bought luxury mansions, soccer clubs, and private jets, making the British capital a laundromat for Russian money. In Israel, ex-Soviet immigrants established another hub for operations, protected by complex citizenship laws that made extradition difficult. Their secret? They never moved as one organization. Instead, they operated as semi-independent cells, all loyal to the same code but adaptable to local conditions. This made them nearly impossible to eradicate. If one boss was arrested, another would quietly take his place. If one branch was shut down, another was already running on a different continent. And they weren't just after money. They were after power. They infiltrated legitimate business sectors like energy, shipping, and construction. Through shell companies, they gained stakes in Western corporations, influencing politics and economics from within. The world was busy celebrating the end of the Cold War while the Bratva was quietly building a new kind of global empire, one fueled not by ideology but by profit and fear. Even today, law enforcement agencies across 3 continents admit they don't fully understand the scope of Bratva influence. Their networks are encrypted, their financial trails buried under layers of offshore accounts. The FBI, Interpol, and Europol all describe the Russian Mafia not as a crime family but as a global enterprise. And just like any successful business, they adapt faster than anyone trying to stop them. Number 5. Their money laundering operations rival big banks. If the Bratva had a crown jewel, it would be their mastery of money laundering. You can kill people and steal millions, but unless you can make that money look clean, you're just another thug with a suitcase full of cash. The Bratva understood this better than anyone. They didn't stash their money under mattresses. They ran it through international banking systems, offshore accounts, and legitimate investments that turned crime into capital. Here's how it worked. Imagine a chain of shell companies registered in Cyprus, Panama, and the British Virgin Islands. Each company owns the next, hiding the real owner's identity. Dirty money flows in from drug deals, arms sales, or extortion payments. It's transferred through multiple jurisdictions, changed into different currencies, then finally reappears as investment funds in real estate or commodities. By the time it surfaces in a luxury apartment in London or a construction firm in Dubai, the money is untouchable. One of the most notorious examples was the Russian laundromat scandal, uncovered in 2014. Investigators found that over $20 billion had been moved out of Russia through a network of fake loans and Moldovan banks, most of it linked to organized crime. The funds eventually ended up in Western banks, including some of the most respected names in finance, and those were only the transactions they found. Even cryptocurrency hasn't escaped their reach. As digital currencies rose in popularity, Bratva hackers and financial experts began using Bitcoin mixers and darknet platforms to wash their funds. They're not just muscle and guns. They employ accountants, coders, and lawyers who specialize in staying one step ahead of financial regulators. But the most chilling part? Much of this money ends up reinvested into legitimate economies. Luxury condos in New York, football clubs in England, even tech startups in Silicon Valley, all potentially funded by laundered Bratva cash. It's crime turned into capitalism, so seamlessly that the line between legal and illegal becomes almost invisible. Law enforcement agencies have tried to respond with stricter anti-money laundering regulations, but the Bratva's financial web is like a hydra. Cut off one head and two more appear. Their accountants speak in spreadsheets. Their crimes are buried in paperwork, and their victims are entire economies. In a world obsessed with tracking data, the Bratva has turned invisibility into an art form. And as long as greed exists in global finance, their money will keep moving, clean, quiet, and almost undetectable. Year 4, the Bratva's most infamous bosses became legends of fear. Behind the Bratva's shadow empire stood men whose names sent chills through police departments across continents. These weren't faceless bureaucrats of crime. They were icons of terror, each with his own myth, his own rules, and his own body count. One of the most notorious was Vladimir Kumarin, known as the Knight Governor of St. Petersburg. In the wild 1990s, when the city descended into post-Soviet chaos, Kumarin rose from a street brawler to the de facto ruler of the underworld. He controlled oil companies, ports, and nightclubs, using violence as both a business strategy and a public performance. In his prime, politicians, businessmen, and even police chiefs came to him for advice. His gang, the Tambov Group, was so powerful that it dictated city politics for years. Kumarin's empire fell apart only after Putin consolidated power, but by then his methods had already set the Bratva's standard. Intimidate first, kill later. Then came Semyon Mogilevich, the brainy Don. Unlike Kumarin's street brutality, Mogilevich ruled through intellect and connections. Fluent in multiple languages and armed with an economics degree, he built an empire worth billions through fraud, arms smuggling, and financial manipulation. His fingerprints appeared in oil deals, art thefts, and even international weapons sales. U.S. intelligence believed his operations extended across 30 countries. When the FBI placed him on its 10 most wanted list, he was accused of laundering hundreds of millions through a Pennsylvania company that traded fake stock. But here's the twist. While the FBI hunted him, Mogilevich lived comfortably in Moscow, reportedly protected by political allies. Other names added to the Bratva's bloody pantheon. Vyacheslav Ivankov, nicknamed Yaponchik, who became the first major Russian mob boss in America. He ran extortion rackets in New York, was arrested by the FBI, and mysteriously assassinated years later in Moscow. A warning, perhaps, that the Bratva never forgets. And then there's Sergei Mikhailov, the alleged founder of the Solntsevskaya Bratva, considered the largest and most organized faction in Russian Mafia history. His network spanned hotels, casinos, and shipping companies across Europe, allegedly generating billions annually. What unites all these men isn't just their violence, it's their legitimacy. They weren't content to hide in back alleys. They wore suits, attended political events, and met diplomats. They blurred the line between mobster and magnate. To the world, they were businessmen. To their enemies, they were executioners. To their own men, they were gods. And perhaps the most frightening truth of all is this: most of these figures never truly disappeared. Some were imprisoned and quietly released. Some were assassinated by rivals. Others simply rebranded as investors. The faces change, but the Bratva's leadership remains eternal, passed down like a dark inheritance from one generation of thieves to the next. Duggar 3. Violence is their language, and it's choreographed like art. To understand the Bratva, you have to understand their relationship with violence. It isn't random, it isn't impulsive, it's calculated theater. Every act of brutality is a message, every murder a warning, every disappearance a declaration of control. In their world, fear is a currency as valuable as cash. Unlike street gangs that thrive on chaos, the Bratva treats violence as a precision tool. For example, a businessman refusing to pay protection might find a grenade under his car, not to kill him, but to remind him who owns his life. A rival mobster might be found in his penthouse bathtub with his tattoos peeled off, symbolizing his stripped honor. And if someone betrayed the code, the punishment could be grotesque: dismemberment, public shootings, or even live burial. Each act carried symbolism, echoing centuries of underworld ritual. In Soviet prisons, this language of blood developed as both communication and law enforcement. A single stab wound in the stomach meant thief. Cuts across the face meant traitor. The body itself became a canvas of warnings to others. By the time these methods moved to the streets, they had evolved into a complete doctrine of fear. But there's more. The Bratva's violence isn't only physical, it's psychological. They weaponize humiliation, surveillance, and blackmail. Many modern gangsters operate with digital sophistication, hacking phones and recording private conversations to control politicians and businessmen. A leaked photo, a planted rumor, a fabricated scandal, these can destroy a life faster than any bullet. And when violence does come, it's swift and silent. No screaming shootouts, no messy brawls. Often, victims simply vanish. In the 1990s, Russian morgues filled with unknown males who had no fingerprints or dental records left intact. Entire families disappeared overnight if one member crossed the wrong man. To the Bratva, mercy isn't a virtue, it's a weakness. Yet what keeps them feared isn't just brutality, it's consistency. For decades, their punishments haven't changed. Betrayal equals death. Disobedience equals pain. Silence equals life. It's a code everyone understands, from Moscow to Madrid. That predictability is what keeps the Bratva's machinery running. People comply not because they love the brotherhood, but because they know exactly what happens if they don't. In a way, the Bratva turned violence into a performance art, a grim choreography that ensures obedience through horror. Every act is meant to echo through memory. When the blood dries, the lesson remains. Duggar 2. The Bratva's tentacles. Reach into global power and politics. The Russian Bratva isn't just an underworld empire, it's a shadow that stretches across nations, hiding in plain sight within legitimate systems of power. Over the last 3 decades, its influence has quietly merged with geopolitics, business, and even international diplomacy. What began as a network of ex-convicts and smugglers has evolved into a transnational force that thrives wherever corruption, greed, or instability exist. One of the reasons the Bratva became so untouchable is their deep connection with political elites. In post-Soviet Russia, many officials depended on mob money to fund elections or control industries. The Bratva, in return, received protection, access, and contracts. Political corruption wasn't an obstacle. It was an open door. As Western sanctions hit Russia over the years, the Bratva stepped in as the unofficial financial operators for powerful businessmen and even state entities, moving billions through networks too murky to trace. Reports by Europol and the U.S. Treasury have suggested that Russian organized crime has been used as a tool of influence abroad, financing operations, destabilizing markets, or even manipulating elections. And while such claims are often denied, what's undeniable is the pattern. Wherever Russian geopolitical interests expand, the Bratva's money, logistics, or intimidation soon follow. They have also established strongholds far beyond Moscow. In Dubai, they mingle with billionaire investors. In Cyprus, they run corporate fronts. In Vienna and Budapest, they sponsor political events. In New York and London, they own property worth hundreds of millions. They operate with diplomatic immunity in everything but name. It's a mafia that no longer hides behind masks. It wears suits, speaks perfect English, and dines with presidents. Even Western law enforcement struggles to keep up because the Bratva's influence doesn't operate through street crime anymore. It flows through systems. They bribe customs officials to move weapons shipments disguised as industrial goods. They launder money through offshore trusts that finance legitimate companies. They fund political candidates indirectly through lobbying networks. In other words, they've evolved from mobsters into power brokers. The terrifying truth is that dismantling the Bratva is no longer a matter of policing. It is a matter of politics. You can't arrest a system that's already become part of the global economy. And in that sense, the Bratva achieved what few criminal groups ever could. They became indispensable to the machinery of modern capitalism while still ruling by fear, loyalty, and blood. Part 1. The Bratva isn't dying. It's evolving into something even darker. Many people think organized crime belongs to the past, something out of old gangster movies or 1990s news headlines. But the Bratva didn't fade away. It adapted. Today, their operations are digital, decentralized, and nearly invisible. The same intelligence that once managed smuggling routes through the Baltic now manages cybercrime syndicates that hack banks, ransom corporations, and steal state secrets. The Bratva of the 21st century doesn't need guns. It has algorithms. Modern Bratva groups employ hackers, programmers, and financial engineers. They run online scams, infiltrate cryptocurrency exchanges, and manipulate markets with the same ruthlessness their predecessors used with knives. Russian cyber gangs like Evil Corp and Revil are suspected to have deep ties to traditional Bratva structures, offering both protection and funding in exchange for digital muscle. It's the perfect evolution: low risk, massive profit, and global reach. They've even moved into the social sphere, controlling media, influencing narratives, and funding cultural organizations abroad that subtly promote Russian interests. The old code of silence, omerta, now extends to encrypted chats and anonymous servers. Instead of blood oaths, there are passwords. But the core principle remains unchanged: loyalty to the brotherhood, betrayal punished by annihilation. And perhaps that's why the Bratva continues to terrify the world. Because it's no longer just a gang. It's an idea. A system of power that survives every revolution, every government, every attempt to reform. From the gulags of Stalin's era to the digital vaults of cryptocurrency today, the Bratva has proven one thing over and over again. No matter how much the world changes, crime always finds a way to adapt faster than the law. Their future isn't underground. It's everywhere, hidden in your economy, your data, your politics. They are both relics of the past and pioneers of a darker future. And whether you're a billionaire in London or a banker in New York, chances are you've already crossed paths with their money without even knowing it. The Russian Bratva doesn't announce its presence. It doesn't need to. Its empire lives quietly in boardrooms, behind encrypted networks, and inside the world's largest financial systems. The Brotherhood was never just a gang, it was a prophecy, one that came true. From the frozen prisons of Siberia to the skyscrapers of Wall Street, the Russian Bratva has done what no other criminal organization has ever achieved, turning violence into business, loyalty into power, and crime into empire. They've ruled for nearly a century, adapting to every shift in history, surviving communism, capitalism, and everything in between. Their story isn't just about crime, it's about control, and how easily the line between underworld and upper world can vanish when money leads the way. If you found this story fascinating, don't forget to hit like and share to help this video reach more viewers. Subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into hidden worlds of power, crime, and history. And if you want to support the channel directly, tap Join for exclusive behind-the-scenes content, or click Thanks to send your appreciation. Every click, every share, helps keep this kind of storytelling alive. Stay curious, stay sharp, and remember, the shadows are always closer than they appear.